everybody, welcome to my dingy little corner of the internet, also known as my bookshelf. That was a weird intro. It's been a while since I did one of these sit-down videos, so I thought I'd just get all my recent reads done. Totally loads of fun, so we're gonna get into it. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Meg. I am a 26-year-old software engineer / degree student. Anyway, as you can see from this massive pile of books next to me, this is my recent reads. These are my physical ones. These aren't even the ones I read on Libby, on Kindle, on Script, or audiobooks, or any of that. And there was more of them. Yeah, I think I added it up and it was like 27 books. So you're in for a good one. First up, I'm going to talk about these three in succession because they are a trilogy, and that is the Brown Sisters trilogy by Talia Hibbert. This is a set of romance novels about three sisters. As the oldest of three sisters, I felt like I was going to vibe with these, and I definitely did. The sisterly relationship is very relatable for someone like me who does get on with their sisters. There's some odd things that shouldn't be similar about the dynamic of the families that, yeah, applies to me. Like, for example, the oldest child is a web designer with chronic pain issues and all that sort of stuff. The middle child is an academic, just like my middle sister. I think in this it's like gender studies, but my sister is doing LGBT policy as her master's. I think she's applying for that at the moment. So very similar lines are being drawn here. I feel like I was gonna like the first one the best because I am the oldest child, and there's a lot more similarities with me in this one than there is in these ones. My least favorite is the last one, Eve Brown. Probably also because it's the least like one of my siblings. Like, I don't feel like my youngest sibling is that much like Eve. The next book I read is And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. This was a book club pick, so my sisters and I, back on the topic of sisters, funnily enough, we have a book club where we alternate who picks the books. But yes, this was Molly's pick, so my middle sister, the academic. She picked this, and I was a little bit skeptical going into it. Agatha Christie, in your head, you think dated. You do. And I wasn't sure how well it was going to hold up, seeing as I've been around the block in terms of like watching movies as well as reading books. So like, I felt like maybe the story was going to be a bit worn out, but I did really enjoy it. And even though I've seen like a parody of this in the form of the Family Guy episode, I felt like it really held up and I really enjoyed it. Yeah, I was surprised by it. I don't love the cover though. There is a much better cover and it's black, white, and red. Do you guys get that when there's like book covers that are like US exclusive or something and you can't get them and it's just the worst? Or the hardback is better than the paperback, but now both are out and the paperback is cheaper, you know? Next up was a book I read on Script, and that was It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. And oh boy, do I have feelings about this book. I hated this book. I really hated this book. And I don't know why. I think it may have been the Ellen segments. If you've read it, you'll probably understand. Also, I just didn't buy into it at all. I didn't buy into either of the possible outcomes in the book. It felt really dumb. I don't know a better way to describe it. Like, it almost felt like it was a parody of itself. And that's awful to say, but it really did. And I know my younger sister, Maisie, actually quite enjoyed this book, so I feel bad, but, you know, opinions are opinions. Next up, we've got a couple of DNFs, which isn't something I like to do, to be honest with you. I'm not really a DNF sort of person. I like to finish things, but I got in a really massive reading slump in February, and I think it's because of these two books, and that is Exciting Times by Dolan, which I have physically, and Topics of Conversation by Miranda Popkey, which I borrowed on Libby. They both kind of fall in this Sally Rooney attempt sort of realm, where you're really doing the mundane sort of thing, but it never quite nailed it in the way that Sally Rooney does. And I'm not saying Sally Rooney is like top tier author for me. I read Normal People and I enjoyed it, and the book club book for this month is Beautiful World, Where Are You? So I'm gonna get another taste for Sally Rooney again, but I feel like these two books, it was like they were shooting for Sally Rooney and just came up short rather than just being themselves. I feel like I could maybe get through the audiobook of Exciting Times without too much bother. I think it was just timing, really. I'm like, not even that far in. It was so so boring. I don't care about you as a character. So, you know, it just, And then Topics of Conversation was just worse because it was just a random collection of women talking about something. And sometimes there was punctuation, sometimes there was no punctuation, sometimes there was speech marks, sometimes there wasn't, and it was really hard to just kind of make sense of. And I at first felt like I was just being dumb, but having gone on Goodreads and kind of looked, I feel like this was maybe a general consensus. Next up, I read Me Cute, which is a series of short stories by a selection of young adult authors, including Jennifer L. Armentrout, Nina LaCour, Nicola Yoon, some pretty well-known YA authors here. I enjoyed it. There isn't really that many stories that really stood out to me. I think my favourite was Click by Catherine McGee, though I feel like I enjoyed the Nina LaCour one. I think it was called Print Shop. Yes, it was. Did enjoy the Nina LaCour one as well, which makes me interested in her more adult offerings, such as Watch Over Me and her new one, Yoga Buena. So, yeah, I mean, it was fine. A lot of it felt very childish, though. I mean, what did I expect? It was YA authors. Maybe I'm just a cynic. Maybe that's what this is. Maybe I'm just, like, really cynical about love these days. I don't know why. I'm engaged. I'm happily engaged. I'm in a great relationship. Don't know why I'd be such a cynic about love. The next book I read was These Violent Delights by Micah Nemerever, and this is a coming-of-age sort of story about two young men in the 60s who get embroiled in this interesting relationship that is very dark and twisted and manipulative, and it was very difficult to read. At first I thought it was going to be like a real solid one for me. I thought it was going to be a 4 or a 5 star, but I did feel like it was maybe a little bit too dark for me, maybe because I didn't feel particularly sold on the reasonings behind the choices they were making, so it just felt like it was dark for the sake of being dark, and it wasn't necessarily my favourite in the end. Next up, I read Last Night by Mhairi McFarlane, and this one was really interesting because I was going into it expecting it to be like a full-on romance novel, and it actually ended up dealing with a lot more serious topics such as grief. It just wasn't quite what I was expecting at the time. Didn't mean I didn't enjoy it. Don't really have that much to say about it. It was good, but it wasn't at the right time for me, I don't think. Especially given the fact that I genuinely refer to the month that I read it in as Grief Month because of the amount of people I lost at exactly that time of year in the past, including my dad. So, you know, Grief Month was not the best time to read a book about grief. Pretty simple, really. The next book I read is a collection of poetry called Canto and Other Poems by Joelle Taylor. This won the 2021 T.S. Eliot Prize. Previous winners have been Ocean Vuong, Caroline Duffy, well-known poets. So I picked this up and I liked it, but it really is something that I feel like is going to be a lot more special for the people that can relate to it. This is really about the butched lesbians of the early 90s and their beloved clubs and the people that they meet and all this sort of stuff. And it's just, as much as I can like it, I'm never going to like it as much as somebody who has experienced the feelings and emotions that come with being part of this subculture. Next up, I read If We Were Villains by ML Rio. This was another book club pick. This one was picked by Maisie. This is a dark academia about a group of friends in a Shakespearean college, and I wasn't expecting to like it as much as I did. Again, another surprising hit for me. Turns out there is a level of pretentious that's just right, and this kind of nails it. You believe it, and you understand the people, and you understand that it's almost cultish, the environment that they're in. I really enjoyed it. Definitely a good one if you're into a mystery. Next up, I read The Burnout Generation by Helen Petersen. I listened to it. It was on Audible. It was part of their Audible Plus catalogue, and I picked it up because I was experiencing burnout at the time. I didn't really know what I was going to get out of it, and I didn't really get much out of it. It was more of a deep dive into the burnout culture that we kind of find ourselves in, especially people of like my age and a little bit older, kind of like millennials. The expectation of loving what you do for a living and the kind of rise in that in the past like 3 or 4 decades. Next up, I read Several People Are Typing. This is by Calvin Kasulke, something like that. This is a novel told entirely through Slack messages, which kind of sounds really boring, ends up being wacky and insane and absurd, and this is exactly the sort of book I love, and I'm fairly certain this is going to end up being a new favourite of mine. I might reread it again before I kind kind of firmly put it on my favourite shelf, but it was definitely a 5-star for me. If you like really absurd humour, like crazy, it's almost sci-fi, but I don't feel like it is sci-fi. I feel like it's a book of its time as well, because it really fits into the narrative of the early 2020s with the pandemic and everything, and people working from home and relying on things like Slack a lot for communication. I don't think many people are going to love this in the way that I do, but I definitely love it. Next up, I read Lifelong Writing Habit by Chris Fox, which is a writing craft book kind of about developing habits of writing. I really trust what Chris Fox has to say because he's quite a prolific self-published author at this point. He's been really successful, not only in terms of sales, but also in the amount he's able to produce with the quality that it is. So I do kind of trust his writing advice, maybe a lot more than I should. I don't know, but I feel like I kind of read it at the wrong time. I wasn't in a position to really get back into writing as a real habit. At the moment, I'm kind of torn because I'm a university student as well as a full-time software developer. So, you know, there's got to be sacrifices, and at the moment writing is that. I don't really have the time to write, and when I do write, it tends to be poetry these days because it's something that doesn't need a bunch of, you know, what was the last chapter I wrote, let's read through that. It can just be what I'm feeling in the moment, you know, that sort of stuff. So yeah, it wasn't really the best time to read it, but it's definitely something that I will go back to and have a look at a lot, especially in terms of the exercises that I'll put in there. Next up, I read Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. This is another sort of craft book, self-helpy sort of thing, more about creativity as a whole as opposed to just writing. It felt very spiritual to me without being necessarily religious, so that was a big shift, and I feel like I'd need to reread it again to fully absorb it, and I do feel like that's gonna have to be the case for me to really rank it highly in terms of the books that I really love. If I was to compare it to something similar, which is Writing Down the Bones by Natalie Goldberg, there is a bit of difference there in terms of the way they present their ideas. I mean, they both have very strong kind of connections to spirituality, but Writing Down the Bones feels a lot more contextual, and I suppose that was the downside of it being more about vague creativity with Elizabeth Gilbert's book. So yeah, I mean, I liked it and I will probably read it again, but didn't really take as much from it as I was hoping to. Funnily enough, the next book on my list, the author of that book, swears by Big Magic, but there we go. So yeah, the book in question is Breakable Things, Poetry and Prose by Katie Wismer. Katie is a self-published author who has a YouTube channel called Kate's Book Date, and she shares a lot of the writing process sort of thing. Definitely a fun one to look at if you are in the writing scene at all. Her writing vlogs are really good, and I really enjoyed the work she's put out, especially recently. This is her most recent release, and it's the first poetry collection she's done in over a year, and I definitely think that the poetry has matured a lot more from the themes that were in her first 2 poetry collections, and I definitely preferred this over those 2. On the subject of poetry, I had an absolute Wendy Cope binge. I hadn't read anything by Wendy Cope before, and then I picked up Serious Concerns because I'd seen a few people read it, like Uncali and Alison from Alison Pages read it as well. Yeah, I totally get it. I feel like Wendy Cope is probably my new favourite poet. I love the way she takes traditional forms. Like, I literally sat there and was playing Spot the Villain out with her poetry collections, and it didn't take me out of it as well, because it feels like sometimes you were kind of meant to play that sort of game. Oh, look at this one that's in this kind of verse, and spot the iambic pentameter, and spot the sonnet and the haiku, but yeah, she's got an absolutely fantastic understanding of poetic form, and it worked perfectly for her in a lot of the poems in here. There's still a few collections that I have yet to get. I think Family Values is one of them, and 2 Cures for Love is maybe the last one, but I will definitely be picking them up because, yeah, new favourite poet, I think. Next up, I read Earthlings by Sayaka Murata. This was my book club pick for April. Feel really bad about the fact that I picked this for a book club book because having read Convenience Store Woman, yes, there's some content warning worthy themes. There were some triggers, I suppose is the correct word, in that book, but they kind of, even ones that might might trigger me didn't really trigger me so much in that one. So I was expecting this one to be quite similar. And given the way I loved Convenience Store Woman, I was like, yes, we should totally read this. This got very dark and very graphic very quickly, and I do feel incredibly bad about the fact that I made my sisters read this to the point where my sister DNF'd it. I am gutted because I love this. It's a very interesting look at the way traumatic events kind of shape your adulthood in so many ways, and just the childhood coping mechanisms and the way they transfer up into your adult life. But it all culminated in this really wacky absurdness towards the end, which I also really loved, because you know me, I love wacky absurd books. I love when you can close a book and be like, what the hell just happened? It's just a thing of mine. I love it. Next up, we've got Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. This is, I mean, pretty well known. This is a story of like a really upper middle class family in a gated community, and one of their tenants, and the way that their lives become very embroiled together. And there's discussions of race, there's discussions of, adoption. There's like custody battles in here, which are really gripping because there's elements of race to it, and also elements of like maternal regrets, maternal instinct, that sort of thing. A lot of guilt as well, maternal guilt, I suppose is the right way to put it. It's definitely one of these books that I feel like if you were a mother, you would take more out of this. As someone who doesn't intend to be a mother anytime soon, if ever, it wasn't my favourite. I will say my favourite section of it was the character of Mia's like backstory, which took up about 70 pages towards the back end of the book, and that was the most gripping 70 pages of the whole book. I really didn't care all that much for the upper middle class family's children, the mother, the matriarch in this family, any of it, besides that one character's backstory. So yeah, it was an interesting read, but not like a really highly rated one for me. Next up, I read I Didn't Do the Thing Today by Madeline Dorr. This is another sort of burnout related book that kind of explores not only why you're feeling that way, but also ways to kind of get around the whole productivity guilt thing. It's something I do a lot, and it's definitely something I've experienced in my life, mainly at the beginning of the pandemic. Working from home, my productivity just kind of plummeted, and I felt a lot of guilt for that, and it was kind of, debilitating. Like I couldn't do anything. Like I felt like I was floating through even when I wasn't being productive with work stuff, I didn't really spend the time doing anything else. I just kind of sat there and I just wasted time, and it was just crap. In that instance, yeah, guilt probably was the best, but now I've balanced my life a lot better. I'm just kind of dealing with that a lot better, and it kind of goes hand in hand with burnout, so it was something that I wanted to read. But it was fine. It wasn't the best, but I don't think that I have particularly strong feelings on self-help anyway. I've come to that kind of conclusion. So yeah, if productivity guilt is something that you deal with, then I would probably recommend it to you, but I wouldn't send you out of your way to read it if that's not something that you feel is particularly valid in your life. Next up, I read Killing and Dying by Adrienne Tamine, which is a selection of graphic novel, short story sort of things. Comics, I guess, is probably the best way to put it. And I read this on the Eurostar back from Paris, and got through it really quickly. It was like, I think the best way to describe it would be like Sally Rooney in comic book form, because it kind of explored mundanity in this really interesting way. Like the opening story is about a guy having a career crisis, and it isn't like even very interesting. He was a landscaper. He wanted to do like garden sculpture, or horticulture as it's called. Yeah, it was just interesting stuff. I don't know. I was interested in the characters a lot more with that than any of the Sally Rooney clones that I was talking about earlier, and I don't think it was trying to be Sally Rooney at all. I think it was just some person telling a set of stories. I loved them. I thought they were really interesting. I really enjoyed them all, every single one. They were all really unusual for graphic novels as well, because they were just everyday life, but also like the dingy side of everyday life, and I loved it. 10 out of 10. Well, I don't think I rated it 5 out of 5. I think I gave it 4 stars. Next up, on the subject of comics, I read volume 2 of Saga, which is by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. I don't really have much of an opinion on it besides the fact that, like, I just enjoy Saga as a series so far. I think it's really difficult to rate comics because like there's like a big arc to them and you're only getting like such a small chunk of it. I suppose it would be the same with like serialized fiction, which I think is making its way back into like publishing fashion. But yeah, I do enjoy Saga, and that's all I can really say. It was a good volume of Saga. And finally, the most recent book I finished was People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. I read Beach Read. I liked Beach Read. I think since then I've become a lot softer on romance. I don't rate them so poorly. I think I got very snobbish about rating my books when I first started rating books. So when I read Beach Read, I think I gave it like a 3-star. I think now I'd give it a 4-star. But People We Meet on Vacation is about two friends who always go on a yearly holiday and kind of the way their lives have evolved around it and how they've been holding each other back, or maybe not in some situations, and their relationship as a whole. And yeah, I thought it was really good. I didn't fully buy into the romance personally. I felt like it was a bit too on the nose, if that makes sense. Like it was too cliche, too perfect, that sort of thing, even though like the road to get there wasn't necessarily perfect. That's kind of how I felt. But all in all, it was a good read, and it was a really great one for reading while I was travelling because, well, I started a Joan Didion book while I was in the train station on the way and got very teary-eyed because I was reading The Year of Magical Thinking. Haven't finished it yet, which is why it's not on this list. But then I was like, no, let's go to the bright, easy romance that isn't going to make me cry until maybe like the last page, and by then I'll probably be home. And I was. And I didn't cry. So, worked out for the best. Oh my god, there was so many books. I'm still behind on my Goodreads challenge anyway, so lots more books in my future, but hopefully I'll sum them up in much quicker succession to last time when I did it in January and now it's May. I'm sorry about that, by the way. But regardless, I would love to know what you've been reading at the moment, what you've been enjoying, so let me know down in the comments below. And yeah, thank you for being here, thank you for sticking around, and I will see you next time.